In the quiet suburb of Maplewood, the HOA Karen, known as Mrs. Thompson, ruled with an iron fist. Armed with a clipboard and an unwavering sense of superiority, she patrolled the neighborhood like a self-appointed sheriff, ensuring that every blade of grass was trimmed to her liking and every mailbox painted according to her precise specifications. Her obsession with maintaining the aesthetic integrity of the community left little room for tolerance or understanding. Any minor infraction, whether it was a stray lawn ornament or a garden gnome deemed too whimsical, would spark a tirade that echoed through the otherwise peaceful streets. The residents lived in fear of her judgment, knowing that even the smallest oversight could trigger her wrath. While most HOA disputes revolved around trivial matters, Mrs. Thompson's behavior had escalated over time into something far more sinister. She had developed a reputation not just for her stringent enforcement of rules but for her extreme intolerance towards anyone who dared challenge her authority. One neighbor, Sarah, had recently moved in and unknowingly became the target of Mrs. Thompson's relentless scrutiny. Sarah's home was not yet fully landscaped, leaving a few patches of unkempt grass that drew Mrs. Thompson's ire. What began as passive-aggressive notes on Sarah's door soon morphed into outright harassment, culminating in Mrs. Thompson's dangerous decision to take matters into her own hands. Little did she know that this reckless escalation would lead to unforeseen consequences, setting in motion a chain of events that would challenge not only her authority but also her moral compass. In her pursuit of control, Mrs. Thompson was about to cross a line far more serious than she imagined. As the days passed in Maplewood, the tension between Mrs. Thompson and Sarah intensified. It started with a single note, a flimsy piece of paper placed on Sarah's door, criticizing her choice of flower beds and suggesting that they were detracting from the neighborhood's charm. Sarah, taken aback by the harshness, considered it a minor annoyance and resolved to tidy up her garden. However, Mrs. Thompson was not satisfied. She saw it as an opportunity to exert her control. The following week, Sarah was met with a barrage of complaints. Mrs. Thompson knocked on her door unannounced, armed with a list of supposed violations: an untrimmed hedge here, an improperly positioned lawn chair there. Each visit turned more confrontational as Mrs. Thompson's tone shifted from condescending to accusatory. "You need to respect the standards we uphold here," she would bark, her voice dripping with disdain. Sarah tried to reason with her, explaining that she was still unpacking and settling in. But Mrs. Thompson dismissed her every excuse, insisting that rules were rules and that Sarah was setting a poor example for the community. The situation escalated further when Mrs. Thompson began enlisting other neighbors to join her cause, spreading rumors about Sarah's perceived negligence. What had begun as petty grievances transformed into relentless harassment. Mrs. Thompson began stalking Sarah's movements, timing her visits to catch her off guard and confront her at inconvenient moments. The pressure mounted as Sarah felt increasingly isolated, struggling against the oppressive weight of Mrs. Thompson's obsession with control. Little did either of them know that this conflict was spiraling toward a dangerous climax that would push boundaries beyond mere neighborhood disputes. Sarah's journey to Maplewood had been filled with both hope and challenges. Diagnosed with a chronic respiratory condition, she depended on a medical oxygen supply to breathe comfortably. For Sarah, even the simplest tasks could become daunting, as her lungs struggled to deliver the oxygen her body needed. She had faced years of treatments and hospitalizations, learning to navigate her condition with resilience and determination. Living with this condition made Sarah acutely aware of her limitations, but it also instilled in her a fierce independence. She was committed to creating a home that reflected her spirit, a sanctuary where she could thrive despite her health challenges. However, Mrs. Thompson's relentless harassment began to overshadow that dream. The mounting stress from the HOA Karen's interference took an emotional toll on Sarah, exacerbating her physical condition. Every confrontation left Sarah feeling more drained, both mentally and physically. The once vibrant woman who loved gardening and hosting neighbors found herself retreating into her home, fearful of the next tirade from Mrs. Thompson. With each passing day, the stakes grew higher, the tranquility she sought was slipping away with every petty grievance. The reality of her medical dependence hung over Sarah like a dark cloud. Without her oxygen supply, even short bursts of activity could leave her gasping for breath. This vulnerability made the conflict with Mrs. Thompson not just an annoyance but a life-threatening situation. As Sarah continued to face harassment, she realized that this conflict was no longer just about neighborhood rules, it was intertwined with her very survival, raising the stakes in ways Mrs. Thompson could never comprehend. The afternoon sun was setting, casting long shadows across the quiet streets of Maplewood. Sarah was finally settling into her home, determined to reclaim her life despite the ongoing harassment from Mrs. Thompson. But as she adjusted her oxygen supply in the living room, she felt an unsettling sense of dread creeping in. The tension had reached a boiling point. It happened one fateful evening when Sarah stepped outside to check her mailbox. Unbeknownst to her, Mrs. Thompson was lurking nearby, fueled by a toxic mix of anger and obsession. In a moment of reckless disregard for Sarah's well-being, Mrs. Thompson sneaked onto Sarah's property while she was distracted, determined to send a message once and for all. With swift, deliberate movements, Mrs. Thompson approached the oxygen tank connected to Sarah's home. The woman's heart raced with a twisted sense of empowerment as she unscrewed the valve, cutting off the flow of oxygen. In that instant, she crossed an irreversible line, transforming petty neighborhood disputes into a life-threatening act of sabotage. Returning inside just moments later, Sarah felt an immediate shift in the air. The familiar hum of her oxygen machine was replaced by an unsettling silence. Panic flooded her senses as she realized what had happened. She struggled to breathe, gasping for air as fear overtook her. The walls of her home began to close in, and she stumbled toward the tank, desperate to restore the flow she so heavily relied on. Mrs. Thompson watched from a distance, her expression a mix of satisfaction and disbelief as she failed to comprehend the gravity of her actions. In that moment, she didn't realize that both Sarah's life and her own fate were hanging in precarious balance, teetering on the edge of chaos. As Sarah stumbled toward the oxygen tank, a wave of panic washed over her. Each breath became a monumental struggle, her lungs screaming for the air they desperately needed. She reached out to the valve, her fingers trembling as she fumbled to restore the flow. The world around her began to blur, colors fading into a haze as darkness crept into the corners of her vision. Come on, she gasped, desperation clawing at her throat. Her heart raced, pounding with the urgency of the moment as she fought against the suffocating grip of panic. Every second felt like an eternity as she felt her strength waning, her body was betraying her in the worst possible way. The stifling silence in her living room echoed ominously, amplifying her sense of isolation and fear. Realizing she was losing control, Sarah's thoughts raced. She needed to call for help. With a monumental effort, she staggered toward her phone, each step feeling heavier than the last. The room spun around her as she barely managed to grasp the device with shaking hands. Dialing 911 was a Herculean task, but she forced herself to focus on the numbers. "Please," she rasped when the operator answered, "I can't breathe. I need help." A sense of urgency in her voice pierced through the operator's calm demeanor as they took note of her address and medical condition. Meanwhile, Mrs. Thompson stood nearby, oblivious to the chaos unfolding just moments after her reckless act. While Sarah fought for her life, Mrs. Thompson felt a fleeting sense of triumph, unaware that within minutes, her actions would trigger a response far beyond what she ever anticipated. As Sarah clutched the phone, her heart raced in tandem with the clock ticking away precious seconds. The operator's calm voice felt like a lifeline, but each word was weighted with urgency as she fought to keep her breathing steady. "Please, you have to send help," she gasped, each syllable a struggle as her lungs protested against the insufficient air. "I'm on oxygen. I can't breathe. You need to hurry." The operator assured her that help was on the way, urging her to stay calm, but Sarah could feel the panic rising like a tide threatening to engulf her. She sank to the floor, trying to steady herself against the cool surface, desperate for any source of relief. The world around her became increasingly surreal, shadows danced along the walls as she fought to focus. Just a few more minutes, she whispered to herself, though doubt gnawed at her resolve. The silence in her home felt oppressive, every tick of the clock echoing in her ears like a countdown. She could hear distant sounds, children laughing outside, cars passing by, but they felt worlds away, isolating her further in this moment of crisis. As she waited for the ambulance, thoughts raced through her mind. Would they arrive in time? Would Mrs. Thompson realize what she had done? Rage mixed with fear as she recalled the HOA Karen's smug demeanor during their confrontations. How could someone be so callous? Suddenly, a siren wailed in the distance, growing louder and more insistent as it approached. Relief washed over Sarah, but it was tinged with anxiety. Would help come swiftly enough? Could they save her from this nightmare before it spiraled completely out of control? Each second felt like an eternity as she clung to hope amidst the chaos. The sound of the siren grew louder, piercing through Sarah's fog of panic and fear. Just moments after her desperate call, the ambulance screeched to a halt outside her home, its flashing lights illuminating the dim evening. Relief surged through her, mingling with the dread that had taken root during her struggle for breath. She could hear footsteps pounding on the pavement as paramedics rushed to her front door. "Stay with me, Sarah. Help is here," one of the paramedics shouted as they burst into the house. Their urgency filled the space, and Sarah felt a flicker of hope igniting within her. The two responders quickly assessed the situation, their professionalism shining through as they worked seamlessly together. "Where's your oxygen supply?" one of them asked, already scanning the room for any signs of the medical equipment. Sarah pointed weakly toward the tank, gasping for air as they hurried to it. The other paramedic knelt beside her, checking her vitals and reassuring her that they would take care of everything. Meanwhile, Mrs. Thompson stood at a distance, watching in disbelief as the scene unfolded. She had anticipated a slow response time, convinced that her actions would go unchecked for longer than this. Instead, the ambulance had arrived with astonishing speed, shattering her expectations and exposing the gravity of her reckless behavior. As the paramedics worked to restore Sarah's oxygen supply and stabilize her condition, Mrs. Thompson's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to mounting anxiety. The realization that she was now inextricably linked to this life-or-death moment hit her like a cold wave. What had begun as petty harassment had spiraled out of control, leaving her to grapple with the consequences of her actions, and the knowledge that justice might soon catch up with her. As the paramedics worked swiftly to stabilize Sarah, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Just outside, Mrs. Thompson lingered, her arms crossed defensively as she observed the chaos she had unwittingly incited. She had expected to feel victorious, but instead, a knot of anxiety twisted in her stomach as the full weight of her actions settled in. "Ma'am, can I speak to you?" one of the paramedics called out, his voice firm but not unkind. Startled, Mrs. Thompson stepped forward, her heart racing. "You need to tell us what happened here," he continued, gesturing toward Sarah, who was now being attended to on the floor. I don't know what you mean," Mrs. Thompson stammered, feigning ignorance as denial washed over her. "I just live in this neighborhood, she's been breaking all sorts of rules." Her voice faltered as the paramedic's gaze narrowed, recognizing the disconnect between her words and the very real crisis unfolding before them. Cutting off someone's medical oxygen line is not just a violation of HOA rules, it's a crime, he said sharply, his tone leaving no room for misinterpretation. "This woman could have died because of your actions. Do you understand that?" Mrs. Thompson's face turned pale as reality crashed down around her. The paramedic's words echoed in her mind, and she felt a wave of panic rising within her. "I didn't mean to," she was violating regulations, she protested weakly, but it sounded hollow even to her own ears. The second paramedic joined in, adding gravity to the situation as he pulled out his phone to document everything. The implications of Mrs. Thompson's behavior were now glaringly apparent, not just for Sarah's life but for her own fate as well. As she stood there, caught between shock and denial, the truth loomed large: justice was coming for her in ways she had never anticipated. As the sirens faded and the paramedics tended to Sarah, neighbors began to gather outside, drawn by the commotion. Whispers spread like wildfire, and soon, a crowd formed on the street, eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before them. The palpable mix of shock and outrage rippled through the group as they processed what had just occurred. "Did you hear what happened?" one neighbor exclaimed, shaking her head in disbelief. "Cutting off her oxygen? That's insane." Others nodded in agreement, their faces etched with concern for Sarah and anger toward Mrs. Thompson. Many had silently endured Mrs. Thompson's reign of terror for too long. Her obsession with enforcing HOA rules had created an atmosphere of fear and tension within the community. But now, witnessing the consequences of her actions had ignited a fire in their hearts. "I never thought she would go this far," another neighbor said, crossing his arms as he glared at Mrs. Thompson, who stood awkwardly at the edge of the crowd, her earlier bravado evaporating. "This isn't just about lawn ornaments anymore, this is serious." Support for Sarah surged among the neighbors as they rallied around her home. Some shared their own stories of Mrs. Thompson's harassment, while others voiced their desire for change within the HOA. "We need to stand up to her," one woman declared passionately. "This can't happen again." As the reality of the situation sank in, Mrs. Thompson could feel the tide turning against her. The community that once feared her authority was now united in outrage and solidarity for Sarah. In that moment, it became clear that the balance of power was shifting, and accountability for Mrs. Thompson's actions was on the horizon, a reckoning that would reshape their neighborhood dynamics forever. In the days that followed the harrowing incident, the community of Maplewood was abuzz with conversations about accountability and justice. Mrs. Thompson's actions had crossed a line that many never imagined she would dare to cross. As police conducted their investigation, the gravity of her behavior became increasingly evident. She faced potential charges of endangering life, a serious offense that could lead to criminal prosecution. The paramedics' reports detailed the events, and witness statements from Sarah's neighbors painted a damning picture of Mrs. Thompson's relentless harassment. The once feared HOA Karen was now at the center of a community reckoning, her authority stripped away as swiftly as it had been built. Many neighbors stepped forward to testify about her pattern of intimidation, shedding light on a toxic atmosphere that had long plagued their lives. Meanwhile, Sarah began her recovery, buoyed by the support of her neighbors who rallied around her. They organized meetings to discuss how they could reform their HOA, ensuring that such dangerous behavior would never be tolerated again. The community realized that change was essential, not just for Sarah's sake but for everyone living in Maplewood. As Mrs. Thompson faced legal consequences, she found herself isolated from the very community she had sought to control. The moral implications of her actions weighed heavily upon her. What had seemed like a quest for order had spiraled into chaos and fear. In this moment of reckoning, Maplewood transformed from a place of division into one of unity and resilience. The community learned the importance of standing together against extreme behaviors and holding individuals accountable for their actions, ensuring that justice prevailed in both legal and moral realms. As the weeks went by, Sarah's recovery progressed steadily, both physically and emotionally. Surrounded by the support of her neighbors, she found strength in their kindness and solidarity. They helped her rebuild her garden, transforming it into a vibrant space that reflected her resilience and determination to reclaim her life after the chaos. Each flower that bloomed was a reminder of the community's spirit, a testament to their ability to stand together in the face of adversity. Reflecting on the ordeal, Sarah understood just how close she had come to losing everything. The harrowing experience served as a wake-up call, not only for herself but for the entire neighborhood. It highlighted the dangers of unchecked power and the severe consequences that can arise when someone becomes too consumed by authority. Mrs. Thompson's actions had been driven by an obsessive need for control, but they ultimately exposed her vulnerabilities as well. The incident sparked profound conversations within Maplewood about community values and accountability. Neighbors began to hold meetings to discuss new guidelines for the HOA, ensuring that everyone's voice would be heard and respected. Sarah felt empowered knowing that her struggle had inspired change, fostering an environment where compassion triumphed over fear. As she gazed at the flowers swaying gently in the breeze, Sarah recognized that while pain and conflict had marked this chapter of her life, they had also given birth to a stronger community. The bonds formed through shared experiences would endure, reminding them all of the importance of standing up against tyranny in any form. With each passing day, she embraced not only her healing journey but also the newfound strength and unity that had emerged from the ashes of adversity.